Hi, Lauren.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
It's nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too.
Well, thank you for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, of course. Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Is that too backlit? Do you want me to close? You want me to move?
No, you're fine. You're fine. Yeah.
Okay.
I think as I we had talked about, I'm the president of my school's psychology club, and your book has been a topic of conversation for our club. So I thought it would be good.
That's really great. Thank you.
No
You were
problem.
one of the first people. We've sold 30,000 books now, but you were one of the very first people. So I just want to thank you.
Oh, no problem. I loved it. Um, and I thought we could just introduce you to our club and
So how
tell
many
everybody.
people in the club? Are you undergrads? Are you graduate students?
Well, the whole school is undergrad and graduate. There we have 400 and roughly 50 people in the club.
And what's the name of the school?
American Military University. It's also under the umbrella of American Public University System.
Okay.
It's a completely online school, so
Got it.
yeah. So, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for having me. And I appreciate the interest you've shown in NAMI's first book, You Are Not Alone. All the royalties go to NAMI, so I promote this with no guilt of any kind. So my background is I'm a psychiatrist. I trained in adult and child and adolescent psychiatry. And I got started in psychiatry not because my family had a lot of doctors. In fact, there were no doctors in my family. And it wasn't because I was good at math and science. I wasn't particularly moved by either of them. I was kind of more interested in poetry and stories and history and sociology. So I became a doctor to understand what was happening to my dad, who was loving and charismatic and very kind. And my cousins used to say, God, your dad is so wonderful. I mean, like, I know. And then he'd periodically get very ill with psychosis and be hospitalized for months at a time. And this in the 70s and the 80s, nobody talked about it. Nobody at all. So he could disappear for 2 months and nobody would even talk about it. And because of that shame and isolation, I got interested in the question of why are these conditions so different? Why are there no casseroles? Why are there no flowers that come when people leave a hospital? So I decided to go to medical school. Again, I was not a science whiz. I never won the science fair in elementary school or high school. And it turns out there's 11 medical schools that don't require calculus, and I got into 9 of them. So there it is. I just wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to become a psychiatrist. I wanted to understand what was going on with him, how to talk to him about it. And so in my work in the field, I've always looked for a book that had real people in it. And it turns out virtually every book written by a doctor says, my patients are my greatest teacher, but anything resembling any of the people is purely coincidental, that I'm keeping everyone confidential. And I thought to myself, aren't we losing a lot of the power of real people sharing what they learned, which deals both with the isolation and shame that is common to mental health and addiction, but also these are real people that people can contact. Like if you want to connect with somebody in the book who speaks to you, you can connect with them. So that's kind of the background on the story. There's a lot of textbooks and a lot of memoirs out there. This is neither textbook nor memoir, but my vision was to have the best of the story for the first person and the best of the textbook for regular people. So that was the vision, Lauren, and that's a little the backstory on You Are Not Alone.
But I actually read that this was Nami's first book, and I didn't realize that until
Yes.
I saw that.
Yeah, NAMI's the largest mental health organization in America, ergo the world. And I had been working on this idea for NAMI's book for 10 years. And it turns out everything has to line up. The leadership has to be ready. The board has to be ready. The publisher has to be ready. And there's going to be a second book, not written by me. I've been traveling
Yeah,
America on the book tour,
yeah.
but there's going to be a guide for parents that's going to come, written by the associate medical director, Christine Crawford. And she's trying to do the same thing, interview real people, tell their stories, what they've learned. So I think NAMI could become a force in mental health education at your Barnes and Nobles, at your local bookstore, at your library. I have a little shack on Cape Cod, and I went to my local library, and it turned out 3 people had signed up for You Are Not Alone. And I thought to myself, this is why I did this. I really wanted people to know about NAMI, because one of the most common concerns, Lauren, people will come to me and they said, why didn't I know about NAMI 10 years ago? So that was one of the ideas. I just wanted NAMI to have this book.
That's great. And I didn't also, not that it matters, but I didn't know that it was all proceeds go to them.
Yeah, all the royalties go to NAMI. The copyright is NAMI.
Hmm.
So this book is kind of a love gift from me to this mission, to this community, to
Mhm.
my family, my father, my mother, my siblings. Most of us who are in the mental health field know about it from some personal experience, self, family, or work related.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to honor that truth, that this book, which is selling really well, and
Yeah.
it's really fun to watch it sell, is going to benefit NAMI and to continue the mission. Lauren, we now have a special now on the Zando website. If you go to Zando Projects,
Okay.
youarenotaloanebook.org, there's buy one, give one. And so all you have to do is show
Wow.
a receipt of any book you've purchased, and you can mail it to anyone or any place you want.
Oh, that's great.
So if you want, so I think it's open for another week or two. But a family just gave me a grant and said, Ken, we want you to do anything you want with this money. And I'm like, well, let's buy one, give one. So it's a lot of paying it forward
Mm.
for this project, Lauren.
I will share that with our club.
Yeah, please
That,
do. And, you can send it to somebody in your life. You can send it to your local clubhouse, a psych unit, an addiction center. I think people can benefit with this in a lot of ways.
yeah. And I just so everyone knows, you're chief medical officer
Yes.
of
For the
NAMI.
National Alliance on Mental Illness, I'm their chief medical officer. So, my job is to translate science. I run these Ask the Expert webinars. I try to keep up with the science and the research and translate it. The book has been a big project, of course. Writing a
Yeah.
book. I'm here to tell you, if I can do it, you can do it, because I wanted to do it for 10 years and everything broke my way. When COVID happened, I realized that there'd be a market for this book. And I also had leadership at NAMI that wanted to support me in doing this. So if you have a dream for a book, hold on to it. Don't give up, because I had never written a book before. As you can see, Lauren, I have gray hair. So I wasn't like a young writer,
Yeah.
with a new cool idea. I was a grizzled veteran trying to write up a series of ideas. But 5 publishers bid on the book. People wanted to learn from real people. People wanted
Yeah.
this book. It was very gratifying for me, because I realized that this one idea I had actually had some legs.
It's actually something I have briefly somewhat thought about. Uh, I feel like I have, a lot to say, but, just trying to make my mark. It's like, who would want to hear what I have to say? But
Well, we could talk about that offline, but
mm,
I think there's room for a good book out there. And I want to say Lauren was one of the very first people, maybe 3 days after it came out, who sent me an email. So I want to say she was one of the earliest adopters. Now that the book sold 30,000 copies in 4 months and the publisher's all excited about that, just want to say Lauren found the book, read the book, and figured out how to get me to your interest club. And I want to thank you for having me.
no problem. Thank you for doing this. And it's also on the USA bestseller list.
USA Today bestseller list. It's won some awards. Best mental health book of the year from Mashable. BP Hope named it one of the best bipolar disorder books. So it's had some nice feedback, and the comments on Amazon are also very kind. Like, people like the book, and it's fun for me because I don't benefit from it financially. So I say yes to every chance to promote it.
And a little bit more of your background before we get into the book. I read that you are a Harvard assistant professor for psychiatry.
Yeah, so I'm on the Harvard faculty and I teach residents and medical students, and it's fun. And that's a small part of my life,
Mhm.
but I got to know a lot of really smart people. So in the back of the book, as you know, Lauren, I asked America's best researchers all the common questions that I get all the time as NAMI's doctor.
Mhm.
Do I really have to take these meds forever? So what I thought is I would use all my relationships with people. So there's a king for bipolar disorder. There's several kings and queens, but I know one of them through my travels at Harvard. And I said, Andy, could you please answer this question in a thoughtful and compassionate way? I have bipolar disorder. Do I really have to take these meds forever? So one of the advantage of being part of the Harvard system is I know a lot of people that are smarter than me, and I asked them to help me with the book. And so in the back of the book, some of these researchers have written 400 papers, right? And I wanted to benefit from their knowledge. Is technology, are the tech solutions, are the apps out there, can they help me with mental health? So I asked the king of American mental health and technology to answer that question. He happens to be on the Harvard faculty and a lovely young man. I've taken him out to lunch. And he answers the question very thoughtfully. Look at the privacy and the data sharing and how the data will be used to inform your decision. So that's been fun. I'm just a part-time teaching faculty at Harvard. So don't be over impressed with that. I just happen to live in Boston and I trained at one of those programs.
And you're also assistant professor at the Boston University of Public Health.
Boston University School of Public Health. So I've taught there for 22 semesters. I've taken 2 years off to write the book and now promote the book. So
Okay.
I have to go back to BU and make sure they still want me to come. I did go and I was a guest lecturer in a class in the fall.
Oh, and are you a native to Boston or?
No, I moved to Boston. My dad, I was born in Philadelphia.
Oh,
Go
okay.
Eagles, right? I think that's
Yeah,
relevant for
yeah,
your
it is. Yeah.
conversation. My dad lost his job after a manic episode, and we were transferred to Michigan, where
Mhm.
Chef Boyardee needed a salesman. He was a good salesman, but very ill. So I grew up in Michigan. I like the University of Michigan football team. I'm a polite driver. I believe in public education. It has a lot of features of the Midwest. I then moved back to Philadelphia, went to Temple Med to get to know my older brother. And then I moved to Boston because only one psychiatrist in America liked my essay that I wanted to become a psychiatrist to understand what happened to my dad.
Mhm.
And this was not well received. I had violated an unwritten rule, which is you didn't talk about your own life or your family's life. And this was a very long time ago. And I think things have changed, but I think you still have to be careful in this world. But so I moved to Boston because one person said, Ken, this is a great thing. You know so much more because you've lived with it.
Mhm.
I'm still on the faculty of that exact same Harvard program today. So one person saying something affirming to you, you can move your whole life. And I like Boston. I'm a Red Sox fan now. I've kind of abandoned the Phillies, but I've stuck with the Eagles.
Um, what you had mentioned about you're right, or not you specifically, but another book for parents.
Yes.
And could you talk a little bit about how far back you think this issue goes with, generations of acceptance or, there's the stigma and because obviously you can only go back so far to
Yeah.
whatever living generation there is. Because I grew up with four grandparents, really three grandparents who did not have any sort of understanding for mental health.
Yes.
Um, and my parents did that too until they, went to college and experienced, more than what is in, what their environment, their home environment. So, and it passed down. My mom, it was a social worker.
Oh,
So, but yeah, it seems like,
attitudes are changing.
mhm,
One of the publishers that bid on the book said, Ken, you can't get people to use their real names. And I said, that was true 10 years ago. Just 10 years ago, the major choice for people with mental health and addiction was isolation and privacy. And again, I think that's a legitimate choice. If what you want to do is privacy and never share, that's fine. But it turns out there's thousands of people who want to make meaning of their experience by sharing it with others so that others can feel less alone.
mhm.
So I can't tell you whether it's NAMI or your interest group book club, Simone Biles, Michael Phelps, like the world is changing. Naomi Osaka, it's just changing. People are more open about mental health than they were before. Your generation is doing a good job of taking it up and talking about it. It's absolutely fabulous. So I'm hopeful. Your generation has also had to deal with more about COVID.
Yeah.
Many people find, virtual education to be more isolating, more difficult because you're trying to figure out who you are and develop your identity and all those things in life. It's harder online. And I think maybe another reason your generation is so strong at this is so many people have experienced it.
I think about the online education, it really did wonders for me. I've gone in person and then online. But during COVID, my cousin, who was in person at Temple and went to online because of COVID, and it was not great for him. And during that time, he was diagnosed with bipolar. Um, and since then, everything's changed really for him. But yeah, it's interesting to see what kind of people do good with
Yeah.
in person versus online.
Some people have selected it. So your
Mhm.
university has selected that.
Mhm.
That worked for some people, but I think people who had an expectation of
Yeah,
being in a community in person that
yeah,
then had a shift because of COVID, I think a lot of people found that to be very challenging.
mhm,
Higher rates of anxiety and depression.
yeah. I don't
Less so, go ahead.
I don't disagree with that at all. It's I actually had switched from my school to this school right before COVID. It was like January
Mhm.
2020 without obviously knowing what was going to happen. And I'm glad I did because it would have taken a hit right
Right,
at that time.
right. Well, that's great.
Yeah. Sorry, what I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay. Um, I think I mentioned this to you when I first contacted you that one of the aspects of this book that I really liked was you talked about insurance. Um,
Yeah,
it's something that you don't hear a lot about.
right.
Um,
And insurance companies are not paying as much as the private market. So a lot of mental health practitioners,
mhm,
many of whom have debt, I want to emphasize that,
mhm.
you know, um, feel that they could do the same work and be paid privately. So
Yeah.
if insurance companies pay, let's make this up, $150, and a private practitioner can charge $200, and there's no question of an audit, the family's never said, I'm going to audit your paperwork,
Yeah.
maybe take money back. So fundamentally, mental health parity 1.0 said you couldn't restrict the number of visits, the number of hospitalizations. That was a good thing,
Mhm,
right? But mental health 2.0 parity would involve a payment question, which is more equity in payment because demand has exploded, especially since COVID, and
mhm,
the supply is unchanged. And I'm not an economist, but if demand explodes and supply is unchanged, the prices go up. And
mhm,
insurance has not kept up with them. I did work at an insurance company in order to understand it. They had a $25 copay for methadone. They had a $50 copay for Narcan. And I don't think it was evil. I think it was thoughtless. I think they're just, okay, this is a medicine. This is what we do. Well, methadone, you take 365 days a year. So a $25 copay is about $7,000. Many people don't have that. So all I had to do was identify the problem. I looked into it. I tried to understand it. So the use of Narcan went way up when we made it a $0 copay. And the use of methadone went way up when we made that a $0 copay. Now, why did I do that? I did that because I wanted to understand how insurance companies contribute to people seeking help and to prevent them from getting help. In emergency rooms, some people have to call health insurance companies to demonstrate that they're sick enough to get into the hospital. Well, I applied mental health parity in Massachusetts for the company that I worked for because no orthopedic surgeon is getting challenged on their decisions to admit their patients. So
mhm,
I'm like, from a mental health parity point of view, how can you have my patients get a level of scrutiny that your patients don't? So that's why I worked in health insurance. I tried to help people think about how to write an appeal letter. Like, American mental health system and insurance is chaotic, confusing, fragmented, and overwhelming. Other than that, it's perfect, right?
Yeah.
And I think how you write an appeal letter, and I know people, it's the last thing you want to do. That's the way the system works. You've got to read the paper and keep going. And if you need somebody to help you, there's do-gooders in many states at the National Alliance on Mental Illness. There's often legal groups who like to represent people, the Legal Aid Society. You may not have to do this alone. So, but I think How to Fight Insurance is one of the things that I want, and a practical book. I wanted to write a practical book that would help people. That was my vision the whole time.
And I think it shows. When you said about debt, so what's your thought when people say like you can't put a price on health, whether it's mental, or physical, but their insurance doesn't cover, they're in debt because it only covers portion of it, not all of it. Um, and how do you think, what's the rationale really when you,
Well, we've decided that healthcare and mental health care is a business in America.
yeah,
And this speaks to our core distrust of government, for which this country was founded,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I have a daughter who teaches English in Madrid in Spain. It's a better system.
yeah,
Everybody has insurance. Now, it's not perfect. The
mhm,
waits are long. If you talk to people in the United Kingdom, it can take a while, but people are covered. The idea that you would go bankrupt due to medical debt or mental health debt is unimaginable in these countries. So, major reform is needed, but the challenge is the health plans have a lot of money, and they have a lot of, lobbyists and advocates. So it's hard to feel great about it, but I wanted to write a practical book, not a magical book. So I
mhm,
didn't want to write, oh, let's pretend we live in Canada. We don't live in Canada. You live
mhm,
in Pennsylvania and I live in Massachusetts.
yeah,
And if you're trying to find help, therapists won't call you back. Most psychiatrists won't take your insurance. Like, these are the real problems. And I wanted to make sure that a person could look at that and say, okay, here's how I deal with that. So I'd
yeah,
like the world to change, but I want people to know how to deal with the world as it is.
yeah. And the stigmas that like being taboo and not talking about mental health, and you think that that's getting better with each generation. I mean, I think it shows, but
Yeah, I think the idea that 5 publishers wanted to bid on this book.
yeah,
So I could have called this Real People of Mental Health, right? There's
mhm,
Humans of New York is a project that, people are interested in. It's a book and a website. This is kind of Humans of Mental Health. And PBS picked up on it. There's going to be a PBS show that'll come out in the fall, interviewing 4 people from the book. And I just feel like times are changing, things are getting better. There
mhm,
had never been a book where real people use their names. And
mhm,
I wanted that to happen. And the publishers recognized, hey, wait a minute. If there's real people in the book, this is radically different.
yeah,
And it wasn't hard for me to get people. I'd travel across the country. People would say, I want to be in your next book. I want to tell my story in your next book.
yeah,
I'm a Cherokee Indian. You don't have that represented in your book, that
yeah,
demographic. The
yeah,
book is very diverse and it covers a lot of different perspectives, but in 130 people, you're never going to get every perspective.
yeah.
So I'm excited that people want to pursue this with me.
So the people that you got, were they more so their story, has it been long enough they felt like oh, time you can use your name, or
I asked for volunteers,
yeah,
and I think most people who do that are in a place where they've thought about it. They've